The Ice Age was an era of relentless cold, where every day was a battle for survival. Picture a vast, frozen landscape stretching endlessly, blanketed in snow and ice, with jagged mountains piercing a gray, overcast sky. Winds cut like blades, seeping into the bones of any creature unfortunate enough to be exposed. Cavemen, the early humans of this epoch, faced a world that was not only unforgiving but also teeming with invisible threats: hypothermia, frostbite, and sudden scarcity of food. Each morning brought uncertainty, and each night presented a cold so deep it could snuff out life in an instant. Survival was not a matter of strength alone, but a delicate balance between knowledge, instinct, and sheer resilience. In these frigid conditions, every decision carried weight. A wrong step could mean exposure to freezing temperatures or failure to secure food, and in a world without shelter or warmth, the consequences were immediate. Unlike today, where modern comforts buffer humans from nature, cavemen had no choice but to confront the raw power of winter head-on. They had to read the signs of the land, the tracks of a passing mammoth, the smell of smoke from a distant fire, or the patterns of drifting snow indicating an approaching storm. Nature's signals were often subtle, yet ignoring them could prove fatal. Survival was a daily negotiation with the environment, a constant assessment of risk versus opportunity. Amid this brutality, fear was a constant companion. Fear of hunger drove them to hunt and gather tirelessly, often venturing into the open wilderness where predators lurked in the shadows. Fear of the cold dictated movement and strategy, compelling them to huddle together in caves or hastily constructed shelters, using fire not only for warmth but as a psychological barrier against the encroaching darkness. Yet alongside fear was a spark of ingenuity. Cavemen adapted, innovated, and learned to exploit their surroundings. The simplest tools, from sharpened stones to animal hides, became lifelines. Every fire started, every fur wrapped around a trembling child, every cautious hunt was an act of defiance against the overwhelming odds of nature. Within this environment, the paradox of survival emerged. On the one hand, the strongest and fittest were essential for hunting, defending, and building. On the other, the survival of the weak, children, elders, and the sick was equally crucial. Letting the weakest eat first during the harshest days was not merely an act of compassion. It was a calculated strategy to preserve the continuity of the group. If the weakest members perished, the social fabric weakened, and knowledge, skills, and cultural memory risked being lost. Protecting them was a form of long-term survival planning, a recognition that strength alone could not guarantee the persistence of the tribe. The landscape itself added layers of complexity to survival. Snowdrifts could conceal predators or trap unwary hunters, while frozen rivers and icy cliffs made travel perilous. Even the very air was a challenge. Breathing in sub-zero temperatures drained energy and tested the limits of the human body. In these conditions, communal living became a necessity rather than a choice. Group cohesion was essential, not just for hunting and protection, but for warmth, knowledge sharing, and mutual support. Every member had a role, and the hierarchy was often fluid, determined not just by strength but by the capacity to contribute to the survival of the group as a whole. Stories of survival were likely shared around the fire, reinforcing lessons and strategies for coping with the cold. These oral traditions may have served as both education and entertainment, embedding knowledge about seasonal patterns, animal behavior, and social etiquette. Even in such a hostile world, humans found ways to connect, to laugh, and to reassure each other that the dawn would come. Yet, the harsh reality remained. One miscalculation, one missed opportunity to find food, one poorly constructed shelter could result in death. The tension between life and death was palpable, and the Ice Age demanded constant vigilance, adaptability, and a keen understanding of human and environmental limits. Ultimately, the Ice Age was a crucible that forged resilience and innovation. Cavemen were not merely surviving. They were learning to navigate a world that demanded intelligence, cooperation, and foresight. The coldest nights tested every skill, every relationship, and every instinct. In this unforgiving climate, survival strategies emerged that balance strength with care, courage with prudence, and self-interest with the welfare of the weak. By understanding the threats of the Ice Age, we begin to see why early humans made choices that might seem counterintuitive today, such as allowing the weakest to eat first. In the frozen wilderness, such decisions were not just moral. They were necessary, a testament to the enduring human spirit that could endure even the harshest winters. In the frozen expanse of the Ice Age, the survival of a group depended not just on brute strength or hunting prowess, but on the delicate balance between the strong and the vulnerable. Within every caveman community, certain members were naturally weaker. Children who had not yet grown into their full strength, elders whose bodies were worn from decades of survival, and those who were ill or injured. These individuals, though physically fragile, held immense value for the tribe. Children represented the future, carrying the potential to inherit skills, traditions, and knowledge. Elders embodied wisdom, the lessons of countless seasons of hardship, guiding decisions, and teaching survival techniques that could mean the difference between life and death. Even the sick or injured, though temporarily dependent, reinforced social cohesion, testing the group's empathy, cooperation, and collective problem-solving. Anthropology and archaeology reveal that prehistoric groups were acutely aware of these dynamics. Fossil evidence shows that some individuals survived despite physical frailty, suggesting deliberate care and protection by stronger members. This was no random act of kindness. Feeding the weak first, positioning them near the fire, or sheltering them in safer locations was a strategic choice that ensured the tribe as a whole had a higher chance of surviving the brutal winters. The paradox was clear. In a world governed by natural selection, the survival of the weak could be just as critical as the survival of the strong. Those who could not be cared for risked not only their own lives, but the stability and continuity of the group. The children, in particular, were both a liability and a treasure. Their small bodies burned heat quickly, making them vulnerable to hypothermia, yet they were the future carriers of knowledge. Feeding them first, wrapping them in animal furs, and keeping them close to communal fires were strategies aimed at preserving the continuity of the group's genetic and cultural legacy. Their vulnerability demanded attention, but it also prompted acts of innovation. For instance, adults may have developed techniques to monitor the youngest while engaged in hunting or gathering, balancing risk and reward. Through these choices, the tribe learned to navigate moral and practical dilemmas simultaneously, blending survival instinct with foresight and care. Elders played a different, but equally crucial role. While no longer at their physical peak, they possessed unparalleled experience in reading the environment, tracking animals, and predicting weather patterns. Their guidance could prevent fatal mistakes, whether advising on when to hunt, where to set up camp, or how to preserve food through the harshest months. Protecting them was a strategic choice. A single misstep without their wisdom could lead to the death of multiple members. These elders were repositories of survival knowledge, and their presence often meant the difference between a group thriving and collapsing under the weight of winter's challenges. Injured or ill members presented another layer of complexity. At first glance, they may have seemed like a drain on resources, consuming food and energy without immediate contribution. Yet, their protection revealed a remarkable aspect of human social evolution: empathy as survival. By feeding and sheltering the weak, early humans were cultivating cooperation, trust, and reciprocity, qualities that would become defining characteristics of human societies. Furthermore, ensuring the recovery of injured hunters or gatherers increased the overall efficiency of the group. In this way, the act of prioritizing the weakest was not just moral but strategic, reinforcing the intertwined relationship between compassion and survival. The environmental pressures of the Ice Age magnified these dynamics. Scarcities of food, prolonged storms, and sudden temperature drops meant that choices had immediate consequences. If the weak were neglected, their loss could disrupt social networks, decrease morale, and reduce the tribe's capacity to function effectively. By contrast, protecting them fostered resilience, encouraging cooperation, and creating a buffer against the unpredictability of nature. Archaeological sites show evidence of careful food storage, shared hearths, and sleeping arrangements that prioritized safety and warmth, indicating a conscious awareness of vulnerability and the need to manage it intelligently. This section also highlights the psychological dimensions of prehistoric care. Protecting the weak served not only physical survival, but emotional stability. Groups that neglected their most vulnerable members likely experienced internal tension, distrust, and fragmentation. Conversely, tribes that incorporated acts of care, like feeding the weakest first, reinforced a sense of unity and shared purpose. These behaviors fostered loyalty and strengthened social bonds, allowing groups to function cohesively in extreme conditions. In this way, survival depended as much on social intelligence as on physical strength. Finally, understanding the weakest illuminates the evolutionary roots of human ethics and morality. Decisions that might appear altruistic today, prioritizing children, elders, and the sick, were deeply practical in the Ice Age context. The weak were not merely passive recipients of care, but active participants in the survival equation, shaping group strategies and influencing social hierarchies. By recognizing their value, early humans demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for foresight, empathy, and strategic thinking, laying the foundation for the cooperative societies that would dominate the planet long after the Ice Age receded. In essence, the weakest members of prehistoric communities were far from expendable. They were pivotal in maintaining social stability, ensuring the transmission of knowledge, and reinforcing the cooperative instincts that defined early human survival. By prioritizing their needs, cavemen were not defying nature. They were mastering it, turning vulnerability into a calculated advantage. The harshness of the Ice Age thus reveals a profound truth. Survival was never about the strongest alone, but about the strength of the group as a cohesive, caring, and adaptive unit. The winters of the Ice Age were not just cold. They were ruthless tests of endurance, strategy, and resourcefulness. Food, already limited in temperate seasons, became almost miraculous in its scarcity during the deepest freezes. Rivers froze solid, vegetation disappeared beneath layers of snow, and animals either migrated or hibernated. For cavemen, each day presented the same fundamental challenge: how to find enough sustenance to survive another night, another storm, another frozen dawn. Hunger was a relentless pressure, sharpening instincts, forcing ingenuity, and magnifying every social and moral decision within a group. Hunting in such conditions required skill, patience, and extraordinary awareness of the environment. Tracks left in the snow became maps to life. A set of hoof prints could lead hunters to a herd of deer or a wandering bison. Yet hunting in freezing temperatures was fraught with risk. The cold could numb fingers, slow reflexes, and drain energy faster than the chase itself. Hunters often had to travel miles over ice and snow, carrying tools and weapons, while remaining vigilant against predators such as wolves or cave lions. The balance between success and failure was razor-thin. One misstep could mean the difference between a successful hunt and returning empty-handed, with the group's survival hanging in the balance. Gathering food in winter presented its own challenges. Edible plants were buried beneath snow, roots frozen solid, and berries scarce or rotten. Cavemen developed techniques to locate and preserve what little vegetation remained. They learned to dig through frost, identify the smallest signs of edible life, and store gathered food in natural caches or insulated pits to prevent spoilage. Even seemingly insignificant resources like a handful of nuts or dried seeds could sustain life for a day or two. These small discoveries were magnified in importance, as the cumulative effort of gathering determined whether the group had enough energy to hunt, maintain fire, or survive a night in freezing shelters. In the face of scarcity, decisions about food distribution became critical. The strongest members of the group were often responsible for hunting and gathering, yet the weak, children, elders, and the sick were prioritized for portions during times of extreme shortage. This strategy was not born purely from compassion. It was deeply pragmatic. Children were the future, elders the repositories of knowledge, and even sick individuals could recover and contribute to the group later. Allowing them access to food first ensured that the group's most valuable social assets survived, preserving both the immediate and long-term prospects of the tribe. In a landscape where each day could be the last, such decisions carried profound consequences. Fire played a critical role in food preparation and preservation. Cooking not only made food more digestible and calorically efficient, but also reduced the risk of illness from raw meat or frozen plants. Cavemen learned to roast meat over open flames or embers, sometimes wrapping it in leaves or animal hides to retain heat. These methods allowed small amounts of food to stretch further, feeding more mouths without exhausting resources. The act of cooking itself became a communal activity, bringing together the strongest and weakest hunters and gatherers to share warmth, conversation, and survival strategies. In these moments, the line between sustenance and social cohesion blurred, revealing how practical necessity and human connection intertwined. Winter hunting required careful planning and cooperation. Groups had to decide which animals to pursue, which territories to explore, and which members to send on dangerous missions. The risks were immense. Frozen rivers could crack underfoot, blizzards could disorient even the most experienced tracker, and predators lurked in the same harsh terrain that humans depended on for sustenance. In this context, feeding the weak first became a deliberate choice that preserved the group's overall efficiency. Ensuring the survival of the vulnerable meant that everyone, from the most skilled hunter to the smallest child, could contribute to the tribe's long-term endurance. Each ration bite, each shared morsel, was a calculated investment in survival. Anthropological studies suggest that early humans developed an acute understanding of caloric needs and energy expenditure. Hunting large animals required intense bursts of energy, which needed to be replenished with nutrient-dense food. Likewise, gathering required endurance and focus, which could not be sustained if the weakest went unfed. Prioritizing them helped maintain group morale, minimize dissent, and ensured that no individual was left so weak that they jeopardized the survival of others. In essence, the survival of the weakest was interlinked with the survival of the strongest, a delicate balance of human interdependence in an unforgiving environment. Food scarcity also influenced social rituals and hierarchy. The allocation of scarce resources often reflected both pragmatic and symbolic reasoning. Sharing meat or gathered plants could signify leadership, reinforce alliances, or solidify loyalty. Those who controlled or distributed food gained social influence. Yet they also bore the moral and practical responsibility of ensuring that even the weakest had a chance to survive. This created a system where social intelligence became as crucial as physical strength. The act of feeding the weak first was both a practical necessity and a reinforcement of social cohesion, a strategy repeated in countless tribes across millennia. In the freezing wilderness, survival demanded innovation. Cavemen developed techniques to trap animals in snow or ice, stored food in insulated shelters, and used fire to thaw frozen meat. These adaptations illustrate the human capacity to manipulate the environment, transforming scarcity into opportunity. Even the smallest innovations, like dividing a frozen carcass into manageable portions or creating primitive sleds to transport meat, could have a profound impact on who lived and who did not. Such strategies highlight the intricate dance between human ingenuity, environmental pressure, and social cooperation. Ultimately, food scarcity in the Ice Age was more than a physical challenge. It was a test of social intelligence, moral judgment, and communal strategy. By letting the weakest eat first, cavemen were not merely showing mercy. They were making calculated decisions that maximized the survival of the group. In a world where frostbite, starvation, and predation were daily threats, these decisions reflected both practicality and foresight. They revealed a remarkable human ability to blend instinct, compassion, and strategy, turning the harshness of winter into a crucible for cooperation, innovation, and survival. In the frozen wilderness of the Ice Age, survival was not solely dictated by individual strength or hunting skill. The ability of a group to cooperate, share resources, and maintain cohesion often meant the difference between life and death. Among early humans, the act of sharing food was far more than a practical necessity. It was a social ritual, a demonstration of leadership, trust, and mutual dependence. In the harshest winters, when resources were scarce and each day was a battle against frostbite, hunger, and exhaustion, sharing became a calculated strategy to ensure the survival of both individuals and the group as a whole. The paradox was profound. In order to thrive, the strongest had to make space for the weakest, blending instinctual competition with deliberate cooperation. Anthropological evidence suggests that early humans had an intricate understanding of group dynamics. Food was often allocated according to both need and social role. Children and elders, whose survival was crucial for the continuity of the tribe, were prioritized. Those who had recently expended significant energy hunting or gathering were also given sustenance to maintain their strength. Even individuals who were temporarily incapacitated by injury or illness received portions, reflecting a sophisticated awareness of long-term strategy. Feeding the weakest first was not purely an act of empathy. It was a method of maintaining the efficiency, resilience, and morale of the group. Without such rituals, the social structure could fragment, leaving all members vulnerable to the unforgiving cold. Sharing food was often accompanied by ritualized behavior, reinforcing both social bonds and cultural identity. Around a communal fire, meat might be divided according to carefully observed customs, with gestures, vocal calls, or symbolic actions indicating who received what portion. These rituals served multiple purposes. They reinforced fairness, reducing the likelihood of conflict or resentment. They also educated younger members about the social norms that govern survival. The act of passing a piece of meat to the weakest or handing the first morsel to a child or elder was simultaneously a practical and symbolic gesture, acknowledging the interconnectedness of the group in the face of environmental threats. These social survival strategies were crucial during periods of extreme scarcity. In a blizzard, when visibility was low and food was nearly impossible to procure, the group had to make rapid, high-stakes decisions. Leaders or elders often determined the order of feeding, ensuring that the most vulnerable were given sustenance first. This prevented internal competition from escalating into violence, preserved morale, and reinforced the authority of those responsible for resource allocation. By observing these rituals, members learned that survival was not a solitary endeavor. The welfare of the weakest was inseparable from the welfare of the group as a whole, and cooperation became as critical as hunting skill or physical endurance. Beyond the distribution of food, sharing extended to knowledge, warmth, and protection. The communal fire became a center for both sustenance and learning. Around its glow, the strongest might teach tracking techniques, warn of dangerous predators, or instruct the young in methods of tool-making and shelter construction. By sharing knowledge as carefully as they shared food, early humans ensured that even the most vulnerable were equipped with the tools needed to survive. The combination of physical sustenance and intellectual preparation strengthened the resilience of the group, creating a system in which survival strategies were both inherited and practiced collectively. Interestingly, this ritual of sharing also had psychological implications. Observing or participating in acts of care and generosity fostered trust and loyalty among group members. When the weakest were fed first, it sent a clear message. The group valued all of its members, not just the strongest. This assurance mitigated fear and panic during the harshest conditions, reinforcing the sense that each individual, no matter how frail, had a role in the group's survival. In a world where the cold and scarcity could easily drive despair, such rituals provided a psychological buffer, strengthening morale and sustaining hope through relentless adversity. The act of sharing also reflected an early form of strategic planning. By feeding the weakest first, groups maximized the chances that these vulnerable members would survive long enough to contribute in the future. Children could grow into hunters and gatherers, elders could continue to advise and teach, and recovering members could regain strength to support collective efforts. This was an early recognition of long-term investment, where the immediate sacrifice of resources for the weak translated into enhanced survival prospects for the entire tribe. The ritual of sharing thus intertwined morality, pragmatism, and foresight, illustrating a sophisticated understanding of communal survival rarely seen in the animal kingdom. In essence, the ritual of sharing was a cornerstone of Ice Age survival. It combined practical strategy with social and psychological intelligence, ensuring that the weakest members of the group were protected while simultaneously strengthening cohesion and trust. In an environment where every misstep could be fatal, these rituals created predictability, fairness, and order, allowing the tribe to function as a unified entity. Fire, food, and shared knowledge became tools not just for physical survival, but for maintaining the social fabric necessary to endure extreme conditions. Ultimately, these early rituals of sharing laid the foundation for the evolution of human empathy, cooperation, and societal structure. By prioritizing the weakest in times of scarcity, cavemen demonstrated that survival was not merely an individual endeavor, but a collective enterprise. Life in the Ice Age was brutal, yet through acts of care, ritualized fairness, and strategic generosity, early humans transformed vulnerability into an asset, weaving social intelligence into the very fabric of survival. The paradox of the harshest winters became clear. By protecting the weakest, the group as a whole grew stronger, more resilient, and more capable of facing the relentless challenges of a frozen world. In the unforgiving winters of the Ice Age, fire was not merely a tool, it was life itself. The difference between warmth and freezing, between wakefulness and unconscious hypothermia, often came down to the ability to create and sustain a flame. Cavemen, facing nights that could last for hours under a gray, bitter sky, relied on fire not only for survival, but also as the center of their social and psychological existence. A flickering flame represented hope, safety, and the possibility of another day. Its glow illuminated the faces of hunters, the small hands of children, and the fur-lined bodies of elders, creating a sanctuary against the vast, indifferent wilderness outside. Mastering fire was no simple task. Early humans had to identify the right materials: dry wood, tinder, and stones capable of sparking flame. In the damp and frozen conditions of winter, this challenge was magnified. Snow could smother sparks, and frozen would require preparation and patience. Yet through trial, error, and ingenuity, cavemen learned to manipulate their environment to maintain warmth. They arranged stones to trap heat, built windbreaks to shield the flames, and collected fuel in advance, anticipating storms that could last for days. Fire was a constant negotiation with nature, requiring both skill and foresight. Failure meant exposure to the cold, illness, or death. The role of fire extended far beyond warmth. It became central to food preparation, transforming raw meat and frozen plants into edible, energy-rich sustenance. Cooking increased caloric efficiency, making every hunting expedition more rewarding and allowing the strongest to nourish the weakest without compromising the group's overall survival. Around the fire, meat was roasted carefully, sometimes protected by leaves or hides to retain heat, and portions were measured to stretch resources across the tribe. Even the act of cooking became communal, a ritualized practice that reinforced social bonds while fulfilling the most fundamental human needs. Fire, food, and fellowship were inseparable in the frozen landscape, each amplifying the others in a delicate ecosystem of survival. The psychological significance of fire cannot be overstated. Its light and warmth provided comfort, a mental shield against the omnipresent threat of death. In a world where the cold could drain strength and morale as quickly as hunger, fire offered a sense of control. Children could sleep more peacefully, elders could instruct with clarity, and hunters could strategize without the constant paralyzing fear of exposure. The fire became a central axis around which the group's daily life revolved, a symbol of security in an otherwise chaotic and merciless environment. Its presence fostered cooperation, as all members relied on the shared resource for survival. Fire also shaped social hierarchy and communal responsibility. Maintaining a fire required vigilance, skill, and teamwork. Some members were tasked with collecting fuel, others with tending the flames, and the strongest often ensured the weakest at proximity to the heat. During particularly harsh nights, these roles could mean life or death. The weakest members, the children, elders, and ill, were strategically positioned closest to the fire, insulated from the cold, and able to survive long enough to regain strength. By tending to the needs of these vulnerable individuals, the group reinforced social cohesion, demonstrating that survival depended on mutual care and responsibility. Hunting and fire were intimately connected. Meat, once acquired in the frozen wilderness, was useless if it could not be cooked and preserved. Fires provided the ability to thaw frozen carcasses, sterilize raw flesh, and extend the shelf life of precious protein. For the weak, cooked meat represented not just nourishment, but an increase in survivability. By prioritizing their access to warmth and food, cavemen effectively used fire as a tool of communal strategy, ensuring that the most vulnerable members were protected from both environmental and nutritional threats. The combination of fire and careful rationing created a buffer against the harshness of the Ice Age, transforming scarcity into an opportunity for coordinated survival. Beyond survival, fire had cultural and ritual significance. Its glow illuminated the first stories, songs, and symbols of early humans, fostering cognitive and social development. Around the hearth, knowledge was transmitted: where to hunt, how to identify edible plants, and which paths to avoid during blizzards. Fire became the locus of communal learning and decision-making, a center where the group could plan, teach, and reflect. In these moments, it was clear that fire was more than warmth. It was the engine of human adaptation, social structure, and collective memory. Fire also influenced sleeping arrangements and shelter placement. Caves or constructed huts were designed to maximize heat retention, with fire pits placed centrally to provide the greatest reach of warmth. The weak were strategically positioned in these safest zones closest to the hearth, often wrapped in layers of animal hides. This deliberate planning demonstrates that early humans were not only reacting instinctively to cold, but also applying intelligence and foresight, ensuring that survival was optimized through environmental mastery. The coldest nights were mitigated by these deliberate acts, allowing even the most vulnerable to endure extreme conditions. Interestingly, fire shaped time itself. Nights that would otherwise have been long, dark, and silent became periods of activity, learning, and social interaction. Around the flames, hunters sharpened tools, elders recounted experiences, and children learned the rhythms of survival. Fire structured daily life, providing both physical protection and psychological continuity. In this way, the act of tending to a fire became intertwined with the act of tending to one another, especially the weakest members, cementing the notion that survival was both communal and strategic. Ultimately, fire was the ultimate protector against the cold, a symbol of human ingenuity and collective resilience. It was both tool and teacher, warmth and warning, life-giver and social anchor. In the freezing landscape of the Ice Age, mastering fire was a testament to the adaptive power of early humans. By prioritizing access to heat and cooked food for the weakest, cavemen ensured the continuity of knowledge, genetic survival, and social cohesion. Fire was more than survival. It was the spark that illuminated human empathy, intelligence, and the earliest forms of social planning in the face of relentless environmental adversity. In the frozen expanses of the Ice Age, survival was as much about shelter as it was about food, fire, or hunting skill. The bitter wind, piercing cold, and snowstorms could claim lives as easily as hunger or predators. Cavemen quickly learned that constructing and maintaining a secure refuge was essential for enduring the long winter months. These shelters were not merely physical structures. They were fortresses of survival, carefully designed to provide warmth, protection, and a sense of safety. Every branch, stone, and animal hide was placed with intention, reflecting a deep understanding of the environment and a sophisticated approach to collective survival. Caves were natural refuges, offering protection from the elements and predators alike. Many groups strategically chose caves with narrow entrances that could be defended easily, while maximizing interior space for warmth. Deeper sections of the caves, insulated from wind and drafts, were reserved for the most vulnerable members, the children, elders, and the sick. By placing the weak in the safest zones, cavemen ensured that even during storms or periods of extreme cold, the group's future and wisdom were preserved. Fossil and archaeological evidence shows remnants of hearths, sleeping areas, and storage pits within caves, indicating careful spatial planning and a clear prioritization of survival needs. For groups without access to natural caves, constructed shelters became vital. Using wood, bones, hides, and stones, early humans engineered huts and lean-tos capable of withstanding snow and wind. Poles and branches were arranged to form frames, covered with layers of furs, leaves, or moss, creating insulation that trapped heat and kept the interior dry. Such shelters required collective effort. Gathering materials, securing structures, and maintaining warmth demanded cooperation and skill. The placement of weaker members within these shelters was deliberate, often closest to the fire pit or nestled under additional layers of insulation. This arrangement not only preserved life, but reinforced the social fabric of the group, highlighting the interplay between physical and social intelligence in survival strategy. Winter camps were more than temporary refuges. They were hubs of survival activity. Within these spaces, groups conducted multiple critical tasks: cooking, tool-making, food storage, and teaching younger members essential survival skills. Communal fires at the center of camps provided both warmth and light, while peripheral areas were used for preparation and storage. The careful organization of the camp ensured that everyone could access resources efficiently, with special attention to the needs of the weakest. By structuring living spaces to protect vulnerable individuals, cavemen maximized both physical survival and social cohesion, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of group dynamics in extreme environments. The construction and maintenance of shelters also reflected a profound understanding of natural materials and insulation techniques. Animal hides were layered strategically, sometimes doubled or tripled, to create maximum thermal protection. Stones were used to block drafts or retain heat from the fire, while snow itself could act as insulation in certain contexts, forming natural barriers against wind. Early humans experimented and innovated, learning which combinations of materials provided the most effective protection. These adaptations illustrate a remarkable cognitive flexibility, revealing that survival in the Ice Age demanded intelligence, foresight, and experimentation alongside physical endurance. Spatial organization within shelters was critical. The strongest members often took positions closest to entrances, acting as a buffer against potential predators or environmental hazards. Children and the sick were positioned near the hearth, wrapped in furs, and kept within the warmest zones. Elders, while physically weaker, were positioned to maintain oversight and instruction, guiding younger members while remaining protected. Such arrangements reflect a deliberate strategy in which every member's placement was designed to maximize group survival. The weakest were not left to chance. Their positions were carefully calculated, demonstrating the interplay of compassion, strategy, and practical necessity. Winter camps also fostered social cohesion and the transmission of knowledge. In these sheltered spaces, hunting strategies were discussed, tracking techniques taught, and tool-making skills refined. Firelight illuminated the faces of children learning to identify edible plants or to sharpen stone tools. Elders recounted seasonal patterns, animal behavior, and survival stories, embedding vital knowledge within communal memory. By prioritizing the weak, cavemen ensured that these lessons reached those who would carry them into the future, reinforcing the continuity of the tribe and embedding resilience into both physical and social structures. Moreover, shelters were designed to manage risk in unpredictable environments. In blizzards, high winds, or sudden snow accumulation, the integrity of a shelter could determine life or death. Caves offered natural protection, but constructed huts required maintenance, vigilance, and collective effort. The group had to anticipate weaknesses, fortify entrances, and manage the fire carefully to maintain warmth throughout long nights. The strategic placement of the weakest near central heat sources reflected an understanding of risk management, where every decision was a calculated investment in survival. The psychological aspect of having a secure shelter should not be overlooked. In the midst of relentless storms and frozen nights, the sense of safety provided by a well-built camp reduced anxiety, bolstered morale, and allowed for rest, planning, and reflection. Knowing that children and elders were protected allowed hunters to take calculated risks outside, venturing into snow and ice to secure food. This balance between protection and mobility was critical. It ensured that survival strategies were effective while also maintaining the social and emotional health of the group. Ultimately, shelters and winter camps were far more than temporary living spaces. They were instruments of survival, social organization, and foresight. By providing protection, warmth, and a structured environment, early humans transformed the frozen landscape from a deadly wilderness into a livable space. The deliberate care of the weakest members within these refuges highlights the intelligence, empathy, and strategic thinking required to endure the harshest winters. In these fortresses of survival, every branch, stone, and hide was a testament to human adaptability, creativity, and the enduring power of cooperation. In the frozen world of the Ice Age, survival often hinged not only on food, fire, and shelter, but also on the ability to protect the human body from relentless cold. Cavemen faced temperatures that could drop to lethal lows, where exposed skin risked frostbite within minutes. Against such odds, clothing became a critical adaptation, transforming fragile human flesh into a living fortress capable of withstanding the harshest winter conditions. Every layer, every hide, and every binding served as a shield against the cold, and the protection of the most vulnerable members of the tribe was carefully prioritized. The weak, the children, the sick, and the elderly often received the warmest and most insulated garments, a deliberate strategy to ensure their survival. Animal hides were the primary material for winter clothing. Hunters used every part of a killed animal, tanning skins and furs to create garments that were both durable and insulating. Multiple layers were often necessary. Thin hides provided basic protection, while thicker furs trapped heat and blocked wind. Early humans quickly discovered that layering was more effective than a single heavy coat, a principle still used in modern survival clothing. Children, whose smaller bodies lost heat faster, were swaddled in several layers of fur. Elders, whose circulation was slower and bones more susceptible to cold, were similarly prioritized, ensuring that these vital members could endure freezing nights and harsh winds. The process of preparing clothing was labor-intensive and required skill and knowledge passed down through generations. Hides had to be scraped clean, stretched, and sometimes treated with natural oils or smoke to improve durability and water resistance. Sewing and fastening techniques were developed to secure garments effectively, preventing drafts and heat loss. Such skills were essential not only for survival, but also for the group's efficiency in winter conditions. By maintaining the weakest members in warm, well-insulated clothing, the group ensured that every individual could contribute to essential survival tasks, from gathering wood to tending fires and assisting in hunts. Layering and insulation were not limited to torso coverings. Hands, feet, and even the head required protection. Mittens and moccasins made from animal hide shielded extremities from frostbite, while hoods and fur wraps prevented heat loss from the head and neck. Early humans understood that small lapses in protection could have fatal consequences. A child with exposed fingers or a weak elder with an uninsulated head could succumb to the cold, jeopardizing the group's cohesion and future. By carefully distributing clothing and prioritizing the weak, cavemen turned vulnerability into a manageable risk, reinforcing the principle that survival depended on strategic allocation of resources. The social dimension of clothing and body protection was significant. Providing garments to the weakest members was both a practical necessity and a demonstration of group care. It reinforced social bonds and ensured compliance with communal survival strategies. Those who received protection were more likely to contribute once their strength returned, while those providing care gained respect and trust within the tribe. Clothing thus became a tool of both physical and social strategy, intertwining warmth with cooperation, vulnerability with responsibility, and survival with community cohesion. In addition to insulation, clothing also offered mobility and efficiency. Properly prepared hides allowed hunters to move through snow and ice without excessive energy loss. Boots or foot coverings improved traction, while layered garments allowed for flexibility and motion, critical for both hunting and escape from predators. Early humans intuitively balanced warmth with functionality, recognizing that overlayering could hinder movement just as underlayering could invite death. The allocation of the best and most practical clothing to the weak ensured that they could be relocated or transported if necessary, preserving life while maintaining the group's operational efficiency. Clothing also played a role in psychological resilience. Being properly insulated against the cold reduced fear and anxiety, particularly for the most vulnerable members. Children could sleep, learn, and observe without constant discomfort. Elders could provide guidance and oversee camp activities without distraction. Even hunters, reassured that their families were protected, could venture further into dangerous terrain. Clothing thus became a stabilizing force, preserving not just life, but the mental and emotional cohesion necessary for surviving extreme winter conditions. In some cases, early humans adapted creatively to the harshest conditions, combining different hides, feathers, and plant fibers to enhance insulation. They learned to repair garments meticulously, understanding that a tear or a hole could have fatal consequences in sub-zero temperatures. By prioritizing the weak for the most effective clothing, cavemen demonstrated foresight, empathy, and strategic planning, recognizing that the survival of each vulnerable member contributed to the survival of the group as a whole. Ultimately, clothing and body protection were far more than practical tools. They were lifelines, social instruments, and symbols of human ingenuity. By layering, insulating, and carefully distributing garments, early humans transformed vulnerability into survival strategy. The weakest members, cushioned against the cold, became living embodiments of the group's foresight and care. In the frozen landscapes of the Ice Age, these innovations were essential not just for individual endurance, but for the preservation of the human spirit, knowledge, and social cohesion. Through careful attention to clothing and insulation, cavemen created a system in which warmth, protection, and communal responsibility merged, ensuring that even in the harshest winters, the group could endure, adapt, and thrive. In the frozen wilderness of the Ice Age, hunting was both a lifeline and a gamble. The survival of an entire group often depended on the success of a hunt, yet each expedition carried enormous risks. Wolves, cave lions, and other predators lurked in the shadows, while icy rivers, deep snowdrifts, and hidden crevices posed constant dangers to even the most agile hunters. At the same time, a failed hunt could leave the entire tribe without sustenance, pushing them to the brink of starvation. In this context, the survival of the weakest, the children, elders, and injured, was inextricably linked to the strategies and decisions of those venturing into the frozen wilderness. Early humans quickly recognized that the strength of the group depended on the careful management of risk. Hunting parties were organized to maximize efficiency while minimizing danger, often with the strongest members leading the chase and the most experienced providing guidance. The allocation of roles reflected an acute awareness of each individual's capabilities and vulnerabilities. Those who remained behind, especially the weak, were positioned in safe zones, close to fires, shelters, and other protective measures. By doing so, the group ensured that even if tragedy struck on a hunt, the tribe's core, its future, and its wisdom remained safeguarded. Hunting itself required extraordinary knowledge of the environment. Ice Age hunters had to track animals through snow, interpret subtle signs, and anticipate the movements of prey across vast frozen landscapes. They observed footprints, snapped twigs, and displaced snow, developing an almost intuitive understanding of animal behavior. Every decision, from the direction of pursuit to the choice of weapon, could determine whether the hunt succeeded or failed. Hunters needed to balance aggression with caution, stamina with strategy, and speed with precision. Protecting the weak at camp allowed hunters to focus on these calculations without distraction, knowing that those who could not endure the cold were safeguarded until they returned. The act of hunting also reinforced social bonds and hierarchies. Leaders and elders often directed hunts, instructing younger or less experienced members on techniques for tracking, cornering, and dispatching prey. These instructions were crucial not only for immediate survival, but for the transfer of knowledge across generations. The weak, safely sheltered at camp, became observers and learners, absorbing the skills that would allow them to contribute in the future. By protecting vulnerable members during the hunt, the group ensured that knowledge, strength, and resilience were preserved simultaneously, creating a continuous cycle of adaptation and survival. Hunting was never without danger. Snowstorms could obscure vision, sudden ice cracks could lead to injury, and large prey could turn deadly if cornered or enraged. Hunters themselves were vulnerable to frostbite, exhaustion, or injury, emphasizing the delicate balance between risk and reward. These dangers made the survival of the weakest at camp all the more critical. Children, elders, and the ill could not be left exposed to the harsh elements while hunters risked their lives. Their protection allowed the group to take calculated risks, secure in the knowledge that those most vulnerable were insulated from harm. Successful hunts had a profound impact on the entire tribe. Fresh meat was shared according to established social strategies, often prioritizing the weak first. This distribution reflected both practical needs and ethical considerations, ensuring that the most vulnerable members received nourishment and the energy required to survive. By linking hunting success to the welfare of the weak, cavemen reinforced social cohesion and demonstrated an early form of moral reasoning rooted in survival strategy. The act of sharing meat was both a celebration of skill and a reaffirmation of collective responsibility. The risks associated with hunting also spurred innovation. Weapons such as spears, clubs, and slings evolved to improve safety and efficiency, allowing hunters to engage prey from a distance or control dangerous animals more effectively. Tracking techniques, ambush strategies, and cooperative group tactics developed in response to environmental challenges and predator behavior. These innovations were not simply about individual survival. They were designed to maximize group success and, by extension, protect the weak at camp. Every advancement in hunting strategy reflected a recognition that survival depended on the interplay of skill, intelligence, and social responsibility. Hunting expeditions also demanded careful planning and resource management. Food preservation techniques, such as smoking meat over the fire or storing portions in insulated caches, ensured that the spoils of a hunt could sustain the tribe for days or weeks. The weakest members were always prioritized in these distributions, ensuring their survival during periods when hunting conditions deteriorated. Even when hunters returned empty-handed, the group's strategic planning, combined with careful allocation of stored resources, allowed the most vulnerable to endure until the next successful expedition. Interestingly, hunting and risk management were intimately connected to the development of empathy and social intelligence. By prioritizing the safety and nourishment of the weakest, early humans were cultivating a culture of mutual care and foresight. Trust in leadership, reliance on teamwork, and the assurance that vulnerable members would be protected strengthened the cohesion of the tribe. The act of hunting became more than a means of sustenance. It was a social and psychological exercise, reinforcing bonds, transmitting knowledge, and embedding moral reasoning into daily survival. Ultimately, hunting in the Ice Age was a high-stakes interplay between life and death, danger and reward. Protecting the vulnerable while taking calculated risks in pursuit of food demonstrated the remarkable adaptability of early humans. The children, elders, and injured members, safely sheltered during expeditions, symbolized the group's foresight, empathy, and long-term strategy. Survival was not solely about individual prowess. It depended on the integration of skill, planning, and social intelligence. Through careful management of hunting and risk, cavemen ensured that both the strongest and the weakest could endure, thrive, and contribute to the continuity of the tribe in an unforgiving, frozen world. In the long, frozen nights of the Ice Age, fire was more than warmth. It was survival. The darkness brought a host of threats, predators prowling for easy prey, sudden temperature drops that could kill through hypothermia, and the ever-present danger of structural collapse in fragile shelters. Maintaining fire was not a casual task. It required constant attention, skill, and vigilance. A single lapse could mean disaster for the entire group. Cavemen quickly learned that guarding the fire was a communal responsibility, and the weakest members, the children, elders, and ill, depended entirely on its stability for protection against the lethal cold. Fire maintenance demanded both physical effort and knowledge. Gathering dry wood in freezing conditions was an arduous task. Twigs, branches, and larger logs had to be collected, often kilometers away from camp, while navigating snow, ice, and hidden predators. Some members were tasked with collecting fuel, others with arranging it strategically to ensure consistent combustion. Hunters returning from the frozen expanse could bring extra kindling, while others tended the embers to keep them alive through the longest nights. The balance of effort, timing, and technique was critical. Even a well-built fire could die if improperly managed. Night watches became a ritualized practice, blending survival with social order. Groups often assigned rotating shifts, ensuring that someone remained awake to monitor the fire and watch for predators. Those with the sharpest senses or the most experience often took the most dangerous shifts, venturing just outside the glow to observe approaching threats. The weakest members, meanwhile, remained close to the fire, insulated from both cold and danger. By maintaining this protective perimeter, cavemen safeguarded the tribe's future while allowing vulnerable individuals to rest, recover, and preserve energy for the coming day. The fire served multiple functions during the night. Beyond providing warmth and light, it acted as a deterrent against predators. Wolves, bears, and cave lions were naturally wary of fire, and its presence allowed early humans to sleep or conduct essential tasks with relative security. The glow of the fire created zones of safety within the camp, where the weak could remain insulated from both environmental and predatory threats. By carefully placing the vulnerable near the center, cavemen maximized the protective reach of the flames while allowing experienced hunters and guards to patrol the perimeter. This strategic arrangement was a testament to human ingenuity and foresight in the face of extreme conditions. Night watches also had a critical role in maintaining morale and social cohesion. The darkness could induce fear and anxiety, particularly among the most vulnerable members. Firelight, conversation, and the presence of attentive caregivers provided psychological stability. Children could sleep peacefully, elders could reflect or instruct, and hunters could return with the assurance that their families were protected. The act of watching over the fire became a ritualized affirmation of community responsibility, teaching younger members the values of vigilance, empathy, and collective care. Fire maintenance demanded creativity and adaptability. Snowstorms could smother embers, strong winds could scatter sparks, and heavy frost could soak kindling. Cavemen learned to protect their flames using natural barriers, rocks, animal hides, and snow walls, to create sheltered fire pits. They also developed techniques to reignite embers quickly, using friction methods, sparks from flint, or residual heat from embers carefully stored beneath ashes. The weakest members benefited indirectly from these innovations, as the reliability of the fire allowed them to remain safe, warm, and nourished without the physical strain of tending it themselves. The rotation of night watches also reflected social hierarchy and trust. Experienced hunters and elders often took on riskier shifts, demonstrating both competence and responsibility. Younger, less experienced members learned through observation, gradually assuming these duties as they matured. The weakest, meanwhile, remained shielded in central positions, benefiting from both warmth and protection. By carefully managing roles, the group ensured survival efficiency while embedding knowledge transfer, moral reasoning, and social responsibility into daily life. The weak were not merely protected. They were educated and prepared for future participation in the tribe's survival strategies. Night watches also reinforced strategic planning for resource management. Maintaining fire through the night required careful rationing of fuel. Each log or branch consumed had to be considered in the context of potential storms, long nights, and anticipated hunts. By prioritizing fuel near the weak and ensuring that embers did not die, cavemen demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of energy management. Fire, food, and human life were intertwined, and the deliberate protection of the weakest reflected a blend of compassion, foresight, and pragmatic survival strategy. The psychological impact of night watches was profound. Darkness amplified fear, but vigilance and fire mitigated it. Children learned that safety depended on cooperation. Elders felt reassured in the presence of caretakers, and hunters were emboldened to take calculated risks knowing the weak were protected. The nightly ritual of tending fire and standing watch became an essential tool in maintaining both physical survival and mental resilience. It ensured that every member of the tribe, particularly the vulnerable, could endure the longest nights and prepare for the relentless demands of the frozen day. Ultimately, fire maintenance and night watches exemplified the interdependence of Ice Age survival strategies. Protecting the weakest members of the group required foresight, skill, cooperation, and continuous vigilance. The fire became both a literal and symbolic center of life, around which warmth, knowledge, protection, and social cohesion revolved. In the frozen darkness, cavemen demonstrated that survival was not merely an individual endeavor, but a collective enterprise. Through careful attention to fire and the protection of the vulnerable, they transformed the harshest nights into periods of security, preparation, and continuity, ensuring that the tribe endured despite the relentless cold and dangers of the Ice Age world. Hunting in the frozen expanses of the Ice Age demanded far more than strength and speed. Success depended on strategy, observation, and the ability to work as a cohesive unit. In winter, when food was scarce and the cold intensified every challenge, early humans had to develop sophisticated tactics to locate, trap, and kill prey. Every expedition was a high-stakes operation. Failure could mean starvation, and success could secure nourishment for the entire group, particularly the weakest members, the children, elders, and infirm, whose survival often depended on these hunting victories. Tracking animals through snow and ice required extraordinary skill. Footprints, broken twigs, and the subtle displacement of snow became vital clues in predicting the movements of prey. Hunters had to read these signs with acute attention, interpreting the size, speed, and direction of animals. Snow, while presenting obstacles, also offered advantages. Tracks were more visible, breath condensed into clouds, and the frozen terrain limited escape routes for prey. Skilled hunters could anticipate these patterns, moving silently to position themselves strategically for the kill. Protecting the weak at camp allowed hunters to dedicate full attention to these delicate calculations, knowing that their most vulnerable dependents were safe. Ambush tactics became central to winter hunting strategies. Predators and prey alike were adapted to the cold, but humans leveraged intelligence and cooperation to gain an advantage. Hunters often worked in coordinated groups, surrounding herds or funneling animals toward natural traps, such as cliffs, frozen rivers, or deep snowdrifts. Each member had a specific role, whether driving animals toward a kill zone, blocking escape routes, or delivering the final blow. Communication, often nonverbal and subtle, was essential to prevent startling prey prematurely. These strategies not only maximize the yield of each hunt, but also reduce the physical risk for hunters, ensuring that those capable of protecting the weak could return to camp safely. Winter hunts required careful energy management. The cold itself was exhausting. Snow and ice increased the effort needed to traverse terrain, and prolonged exposure could rapidly deplete strength. Hunters had to balance the energy expended chasing prey with a potential caloric return. Each kill was precious, and rationing the meat to provide sustenance for the weakest members was a crucial part of planning. A successful hunt allowed children to be nourished, elders to regain strength, and the sick to recover, ensuring the tribe's collective survival. Every decision in the field, from when to pursue to when to retreat, was influenced by this delicate calculus. Cooperation was essential to hunting efficiency and safety. Individuals shared responsibilities, with experienced hunters mentoring novices and coordinating movements to optimize results. Roles were fluid but defined by skill, strength, and knowledge of terrain and prey behavior. By working together, hunters could tackle larger and more dangerous animals than any one individual could manage alone. Protecting the weak at camp reinforced this teamwork. Knowing that the most vulnerable were secure enabled hunters to focus entirely on executing coordinated strategies without hesitation or distraction. Trap setting was another critical winter tactic. Early humans designed pitfalls, snares, and natural enclosures to catch animals with minimal energy expenditure. Snow and ice were used strategically to conceal traps and guide prey toward them. These methods were particularly useful for supplying food to the weak, as traps could provide a steady source of protein even when hunters were unable to venture far due to weather or injury. Skillful use of traps demonstrated not only ingenuity, but also an understanding of resource management, ensuring that every member of the group had access to sustenance. Observing animal behavior was central to effective winter hunting. Hunters studied migration patterns, feeding habits, and seasonal movements to anticipate where prey would be most vulnerable. This knowledge allowed them to plan expeditions with precision, minimizing risk and maximizing returns. By tracking herd behavior, understanding predator-prey interactions, and leveraging environmental features, cavemen were able to secure enough food to sustain the weak during periods when hunting would otherwise be nearly impossible. Their success was a combination of patience, intelligence, and acute environmental awareness. Communication during hunts was subtle but vital. Hunters developed signals, both vocal and gestural, to coordinate actions without alerting prey. Silence, timing, and positioning were essential, and the weakest members, safely sheltered at camp, benefited indirectly from this efficiency. By keeping the most vulnerable away from immediate danger, the tribe ensured that knowledge, skill, and resources were preserved, allowing them to endure despite the harshest winters. Winter hunting also required contingency planning. Storms, frozen rivers, or sudden changes in animal behavior could derail even the most meticulously planned hunts. By protecting the weak at camp and rationing stored food carefully, early humans created a buffer against failure. This allowed hunters to take calculated risks in the field, knowing that those most dependent on their success were shielded from immediate danger. The combination of planning, strategy, and protection created a system in which survival was both flexible and resilient. Finally, the social impact of successful hunting in winter cannot be overstated. Providing the first portions of meat to the weakest members reinforced social hierarchies, trust, and cooperation. Children learned the value of patience and collective effort. Elders observed and guided, and the entire group witnessed the tangible benefits of strategic thinking and empathy. Winter hunts became not just exercises in survival, but lessons in leadership, foresight, and communal responsibility, ensuring that both the present and future generations were equipped to endure the challenges of Ice Age life. Ultimately, winter hunting was a delicate balance of risk, skill, and cooperation. Through tracking, ambush, and teamwork, early humans were able to secure sustenance while protecting the most vulnerable. The children, elders, and sick, safely sheltered and nourished, represented both the immediate stakes and the future of the tribe. By combining strategy, ingenuity, and social intelligence, cavemen transformed hunting into a multidimensional survival system. In the frozen landscapes of the Ice Age, every hunt was a testament to human adaptability, foresight, and the enduring power of collective care, ensuring that even in the harshest conditions, the weakest could survive, learn, and contribute to the continuity of the tribe. In the merciless cold of the Ice Age, survival was as much about rest as it was about hunting, fire, or shelter. The human body required sleep to recover from the relentless physical exertion of foraging, hunting, and tending fires. Yet achieving rest in freezing temperatures was no simple feat. Cavemen had to carefully manage energy expenditure, warmth, and safety, balancing the demands of survival with the restorative needs of their bodies. Sleep, in this context, was not merely a biological necessity. It became a strategic survival cycle, particularly for the weakest members of the tribe, whose continued existence depended on both physical protection and effective recuperation. Shelters and winter camps were designed with rest in mind. Caves or constructed huts offered protection from wind and predators, while insulation from animal hides, furs, and layered bedding provided warmth. The weakest members, the children, elders, and sick, were strategically positioned near the fire or in the most insulated areas. By placing the most vulnerable in zones of optimal warmth, cavemen ensured that they could rest deeply, conserve energy, and recover from both cold and illness. This careful planning reflected a sophisticated understanding of physiology, environmental adaptation, and social responsibility. The timing of sleep and rest was also crucial. Long winter nights required strategic allocation of wakeful periods and watch shifts. While some members tended the fire and guarded against predators, others slept in insulated areas, maintaining cycles that maximized both safety and recovery. Even brief periods of rest were vital, allowing hunters to regain strength for excursions, fire tenders to remain alert, and the weak to maintain baseline health. These cycles became embedded in daily routines, creating a rhythm that balanced survival imperatives with the body's biological needs. Sleep was particularly important for the weakest members, whose energy reserves were limited. Children required warmth and uninterrupted rest to grow and develop. Elders needed recuperation to retain knowledge and guide the group, and the sick depended on rest to recover from injury or illness. By prioritizing these individuals in sleeping arrangements, cavemen effectively invested in the long-term survival of the tribe. The placement of the vulnerable near warmth and safety was a deliberate survival strategy, reinforcing the principle that caring for the weak strengthened the group as a whole. Beyond physical recuperation, rest had psychological benefits. Sleep provided a buffer against the stress of harsh conditions, reducing anxiety and fear. Darkness and cold could easily overwhelm the mind, but well-structured rest allowed individuals to process experiences, plan for future survival, and maintain social cohesion. Children who slept securely near the fire remained calm, learning the rhythms of camp life. Elders who rested adequately retained focus, passing down critical knowledge, while hunters and gatherers maintained mental clarity for high-risk excursions. The interplay of rest and vigilance thus supported both physical survival and cognitive resilience. Cavemen also developed strategies to enhance the quality of rest in extreme conditions. Layers of hides, elevated sleeping platforms, and insulated bedding reduced heat loss and minimized exposure to moisture. Group sleeping arrangements provided shared body heat, further stabilizing temperatures for the weakest members. Even minor adjustments, such as positioning backs to prevailing winds or tucking extremities into warm layers, reflected careful observation and adaptation to the environment. These techniques demonstrate that sleep in the Ice Age was not passive. It was an active, deliberate component of survival strategy. Rest cycles were closely linked to energy management. In extreme cold, every action expended calories at a faster rate than in temperate conditions. Conserving energy through well-timed sleep ensured that hunters retained the strength to pursue prey. Fire tenders could maintain warmth, and vulnerable individuals preserved vital reserves. Nightly rest was complemented by midday naps when possible, particularly for children and the sick, creating a flexible system of recuperation that adjusted to both environmental and social needs. By structuring rest strategically, early humans optimized their survival efficiency, turning sleep into a deliberate tool rather than a passive necessity. Social dynamics also influenced sleep patterns. The weakest members were not only protected physically, but monitored to ensure uninterrupted rest. Elders or caregivers often observed sleeping areas, maintaining warmth and intervening if danger arose. This constant vigilance allowed the group to function as a cohesive unit. Some members could rest while others worked or guarded. By integrating sleep into the tribe's survival strategy, cavemen ensured that every individual contributed to the overall resilience of the group, regardless of age or physical strength. Even in rest, preparation for survival continued. Tools were arranged nearby, fire embers were maintained, and plans for the next day were discussed quietly around the fire. Sleep became part of a larger cycle of activity, observation, and strategy. The weak were safeguarded not only by proximity to warmth, but by the constant readiness of the group to respond to threats. This integration of rest, protection, and planning exemplifies the sophisticated survival intelligence of early humans, where physical, social, and cognitive strategies were seamlessly intertwined. Ultimately, sleep, rest, and recuperation were foundational to winter survival. They allowed individuals to recover from the extreme demands of the environment, provided psychological stability, and ensured that the most vulnerable members could endure. By structuring sleeping arrangements, maintaining warmth, and rotating watch shifts, cavemen transformed rest into a strategic, protective practice. In the frozen landscapes of the Ice Age, survival depended not only on strength and skill, but on the intelligent management of energy, vigilance, and care for the weakest. Through these winter survival cycles, the tribe maintained both life and knowledge, preserving the continuity and resilience essential for enduring the harshest conditions of the Ice Age. In the harsh, frozen winters of the Ice Age, survival was rarely a solitary endeavor. The bitter cold, relentless predators, and scarcity of food demanded cooperation, coordination, and collective effort. Cavemen quickly learned that strength in numbers was more than a practical advantage. It was a psychological and social necessity. Winter gatherings, when the entire group congregated in protected shelters, became a central feature of survival, enabling early humans to pool resources, share knowledge, and protect the most vulnerable members of the tribe. These gatherings were as much about strategy as they were about community, providing a foundation for both physical endurance and social cohesion. Group dynamics during winter were carefully managed. The most vulnerable, children, elders, and the sick, were strategically positioned near the fire in the center of activity, where warmth, food, and protection were most accessible. Stronger members took positions closer to entrances or outer areas, forming a human buffer against cold and potential threats. These arrangements reflected an intuitive understanding of risk management, ensuring that the weakest members were insulated from danger while still benefiting from the group's collective strength. Survival, in this sense, became a carefully choreographed interplay of placement, vigilance, and social responsibility. Winter gatherings were also critical for resource management. Food, fuel, and tools were centralized and distributed according to necessity and priority. Freshly hunted meat was shared, often with the weakest members receiving the first portions, reflecting both practical survival strategy and communal ethics. Wood and other fuel sources were allocated carefully to maintain warmth throughout the longest nights. These gatherings allowed the group to synchronize efforts, ensuring that no individual was left exposed or underprovisioned. In doing so, cavemen transformed scarcity into a coordinated system of care and efficiency, reinforcing the interdependence of the tribe. Beyond practical concerns, winter gatherings played a crucial role in the transmission of knowledge. Elders and experienced hunters used these periods to teach younger members essential survival skills: tracking, tool-making, fire management, and understanding animal behavior. Stories, lessons, and warnings were shared around the fire, embedding critical survival strategies into the memory of the group. The weakest members, protected at the center, absorbed these lessons indirectly, ensuring that knowledge would persist across generations. In this way, winter gatherings were not merely a moment of survival. They were the incubators of culture, intelligence, and foresight. Communication within these gatherings was multifaceted. Gestures, vocalizations, and storytelling became tools for coordination, instruction, and morale building. Subtle social hierarchies emerged, based on skill, age, and experience, guiding the distribution of resources and responsibilities. The presence of the weak influenced group decisions profoundly, as their needs dictated priorities in warmth, nutrition, and protection. This interdependence reinforced empathy, planning, and cooperation, making winter gatherings both practical and socially formative events. The physical environment shaped the nature of these gatherings. Caves, rock shelters, and constructed huts were organized to maximize warmth and efficiency. Fire pits were centrally located and bedding arranged to optimize insulation. Peripheral spaces were used for storage, food preparation, and tool maintenance, while the weak remained at the heart of the camp. This deliberate spatial organization demonstrates that early humans understood not only the importance of warmth and protection, but also the social and psychological benefits of centralized group activity. Every decision about positioning and resource allocation reflected a balance between survival efficiency and social cohesion. Winter gatherings also reinforced trust and shared responsibility. Individuals understood that their actions could impact the well-being of the weakest members. Stronger members protecting entrances, tending fires, or assisting with food preparation ensured that children, elders, and the ill remained safe. These dynamics fostered a sense of accountability, teaching younger members that survival depended on collective vigilance. By embedding responsibility into daily life, cavemen cultivated a culture of cooperation, ensuring that both immediate and future survival needs were met. The psychological impact of group gatherings was profound. In a landscape of perpetual cold and looming threats, human presence provided comfort, reducing fear and stress. Children felt secure, elders gained reassurance, and the tribe's collective morale was strengthened. Firelight, conversation, and shared activities created a sense of normalcy and predictability amidst environmental chaos. These gatherings were essential for maintaining the mental health and resilience necessary to endure long winters, highlighting the interplay between social structure and survival strategy. Winter gatherings also facilitated strategic planning for upcoming challenges. Hunting expeditions, resource allocation, and shelter maintenance were discussed and coordinated during these meetings. The weakest members were considered in every plan, from rationing food to assigning protective duties. By integrating the needs of vulnerable individuals into collective strategy, cavemen ensured that survival was both comprehensive and inclusive. These gatherings transformed individual efforts into a coordinated system, maximizing efficiency, safety, and the likelihood of enduring the harshest conditions. Cultural practices and rituals often intertwined with survival strategies during winter gatherings. Firelit storytelling, communal meals, and shared songs served multiple purposes, reinforcing social bonds, transmitting knowledge, and providing psychological comfort. Such practices ensured that even the weakest members remained integrated into group life, fostering a sense of belonging and purpose. These rituals reinforced the notion that survival was not only physical, but also social and emotional, embedding resilience at multiple levels. Ultimately, winter gatherings exemplified the profound interconnection between social cohesion and survival. By pooling resources, sharing knowledge, and protecting the weakest, cavemen created a system that optimized both immediate survival and long-term adaptability. These gatherings demonstrated that the human advantage lay not only in physical skill, but in intelligence, empathy, and cooperation. In the frozen landscapes of the Ice Age, the strength of the tribe was measured not by individual prowess, but by the ability to organize, protect, and nurture each member. Winter gatherings transformed vulnerability into strength, isolation into community, and survival into a collective endeavor. For Ice Age humans, survival was not solely a matter of fire, food, or shelter. It was deeply intertwined with belief, ritual, and a sense of the spiritual. Winter, with its relentless cold, long nights, and scarcity of resources, amplified both the physical and psychological challenges of life. In this context, rituals and spiritual practices became essential coping mechanisms, providing structure, reassurance, and a sense of control over an otherwise unpredictable and hostile environment. Cavemen developed rituals not only to appease forces beyond their understanding, but also to reinforce social cohesion, prioritize the weakest members, and instill hope and resilience during the harshest months. The longest nights of winter often brought reflection and fear. Snowstorms could isolate groups, predators prowled unseen, and food shortages were common. To manage these uncertainties, early humans turned to ritual. Fire ceremonies, rhythmic drumming, singing, and symbolic gestures created patterns and meaning amidst chaos. These practices provided psychological comfort, reducing anxiety and reinforcing communal bonds. Children and elders, often the most vulnerable to both cold and stress, were central participants or witnesses in these rituals. Their inclusion was deliberate. By keeping the weak engaged and protected, the tribe maintained both the continuity of knowledge and the cohesion of the group. Many rituals revolved around survival essentials. Before hunts, ceremonies might be conducted to honor animals, asking for success and safe passage. Hunters observed specific patterns, gestures, or chants intended to show respect and encourage abundance. Such rituals were practical as well as spiritual. By promoting careful observation, planning, and respect for prey, they increased the likelihood of a successful hunt. The weak, protected in the warmth of the shelter, absorbed these lessons, learning indirectly the ethical and strategic framework that guided the group. In this way, rituals bridged the physical and social worlds, ensuring that the weakest could benefit from the wisdom of the elders without direct exposure to danger. Winter rituals also served to mark the passage of time. In environments where daylight was limited and seasons seemed interminable, ceremonies provided structure and predictability. Observing patterns in the moon, the stars, or seasonal changes became intertwined with ritual acts, from dance and storytelling to offerings of food or crafted objects. These practices offered the group a sense of control and anticipation, helping them prepare for upcoming hunts, migrations, or weather events. Protecting the weakest members during these rituals ensured that knowledge could be transmitted safely and consistently across generations, creating both continuity and stability. Fire played a central role in ritualistic life during winter. The hearth was not just a source of warmth and cooking. It was a symbolic and spiritual center. Gatherings around the fire included chants, storytelling, and gestures of reverence, creating a shared sense of purpose and collective identity. The weakest members were seated closest to the flames, insulated from cold and danger, allowing them to experience and internalize these spiritual practices safely. This arrangement reinforced the dual function of fire as both practical survival tool and spiritual anchor, emphasizing that physical protection and psychological support were inseparable in Ice Age life. Art and symbolism also emerged as integral to winter rituals. Cave paintings, carvings, and etchings depicted animals, hunting scenes, and abstract symbols. These artworks were not purely decorative. They communicated survival strategies, moral lessons, and spiritual beliefs. Weak members of the tribe, particularly children, observed and learned from these symbolic representations, internalizing cultural knowledge without directly facing environmental hazards. The deliberate protection of the vulnerable ensured that both practical and spiritual wisdom was preserved, allowing the group to endure winter physically, socially, and psychologically. Rituals often incorporated elements of reciprocity and community care. Sharing of food, layering of clothing, and collective tending of fire during ceremonies emphasized interdependence. The weak were prioritized, receiving the first portions of meat or the warmest furs, highlighting the ethical dimension of survival. By integrating spiritual practice with tangible acts of care, early humans reinforced social bonds and established norms of cooperation. These acts of collective responsibility transformed survival from an individual struggle into a communal endeavor, embedding empathy and foresight into the core of human behavior. Dreams and visions may have also held significance. The longest nights of winter provided uninterrupted time for reflection and contemplation, and early humans likely interpreted dreams as messages or guidance from unseen forces. Elders, considered wise and experienced, could advise the group based on these insights, guiding hunting strategies, shelter maintenance, or social organization. The protection of the weakest members ensured they could participate in these cultural and spiritual processes safely, gradually learning the tribe's interpretive frameworks while remaining insulated from physical danger. Rituals and beliefs also helped mitigate fear of death. Winter mortality was high, especially among the vulnerable. By incorporating the weak into symbolic acts, ceremonies provided reassurance and meaning, reducing panic and despair. Children learned that survival depended not only on skill, but on communal support and adherence to cultural practices. Elders could maintain authority and transmit knowledge without exposing themselves or others unnecessarily. Through ritual, cavemen established a spiritual safety net, ensuring that even when physical threats loomed large, the group could endure psychologically. Ultimately, winter rituals and beliefs were as much about practical survival as they were about spiritual expression. By prioritizing the weakest members, early humans ensured that the continuity of knowledge, culture, and adaptive strategies was maintained. Rituals reinforced social cohesion, encouraged ethical behavior, and provided psychological resilience, creating an integrated system that supported both physical and spiritual survival. In the unforgiving Ice Age, these practices transformed isolation and fear into community and purpose, embedding empathy, foresight, and cultural intelligence into the very fabric of life. Through fire, song, symbolism, and ceremony, cavemen navigated the darkest, coldest months, ensuring that the weak were protected, knowledge was preserved, and the tribe endured across generations. In the relentless cold of the Ice Age, survival often meant moving. The harsh winters forced early humans to make critical decisions about when and where to migrate, following the seasonal rhythms of prey, water sources, and shelter opportunities. Migration was not a leisurely journey. It was a calculated strategy that balanced risk and reward, with the primary goal of sustaining the entire tribe. The weakest members, the children, the elders, and the sick, were central considerations in these decisions, as their survival depended on both protection and pacing during the arduous treks across frozen landscapes. Tracking herds became a lifeline. Large animals, such as mammoths, reindeer, and bison, dictated human movement, and early humans developed sophisticated observational skills to anticipate migration patterns. Footprints in snow, broken branches, and grazing signs provided crucial information, allowing groups to plan their routes and timing. Every decision was strategic. Moving too early could mean starvation. Moving too late could result in missing the herds altogether. The weakest members were often shielded during these treks, positioned at the center of human formations, protected from cold winds and potential predators. This deliberate positioning ensured that the most vulnerable could endure the physical challenges while benefiting from the group's collective strength. Migration demanded meticulous logistical planning. Food and firewood had to be rationed, tools secured, and temporary shelters identified along the route. Leaders and experienced hunters calculated distances, rest periods, and safe stopping points, ensuring that the tribe maintained energy efficiency and minimized exposure. Vulnerable members required additional considerations. Children needed more frequent breaks. Elders required stable footing and warmth, and the sick had to be carried or assisted across difficult terrain. The movement of the entire tribe became a dynamic orchestration of strength, knowledge, and care, demonstrating early humans' remarkable adaptability and foresight. The social dynamics of winter journeys were complex and deeply intertwined with survival strategy. Stronger members served as both protectors and pathfinders, forming a perimeter around the weak to guard against predators and environmental hazards. Those less experienced learned by observing and participating under guidance. By prioritizing the protection and nourishment of the most vulnerable, the tribe ensured that knowledge, skill, and collective wisdom were preserved for future generations. The journey itself became an educational environment where survival skills were transmitted through direct experience and careful observation, all while keeping the weak insulated from unnecessary risk. Movement in winter required adaptation to extreme environmental challenges. Snow drifts, icy rivers, blizzards, and hidden crevices created constant hazards. Hunters and pathfinders developed techniques to navigate these obstacles safely, using natural landmarks, ice formations, and previous tracks to guide their path. The weakest members were often carried in makeshift sleds or supported physically during particularly treacherous stretches. This strategy not only ensured survival, but demonstrated an early understanding of ergonomics and energy conservation, reflecting the sophisticated intelligence required for winter migration. Migration also demanded innovative approaches to shelter. Temporary camps were constructed along the route, often using snow walls, rocks, and animal hides to create insulated spaces. Fires were carefully positioned to provide warmth and protection, with the weakest members placed centrally. These transient arrangements maintained safety and comfort while allowing the tribe to remain mobile, demonstrating an understanding of both environmental adaptation and social prioritization. Every temporary camp was a microcosm of the larger survival system, balancing warmth, protection, and operational efficiency. Food management during migration was critical. Hunting along the route provided immediate sustenance, while preserved meat and gathered resources served as reserves. Weak members were always prioritized in food distribution, ensuring that those most susceptible to cold and starvation remained nourished. This careful allocation allowed hunters to focus on acquiring additional resources without jeopardizing the survival of the vulnerable. The practice illustrates the combination of strategy, empathy, and long-term planning that defined Ice Age survival. Winter migrations also required cooperation and rhythm. The pace of travel was deliberately set to match the endurance of the weakest members. Children were guided along safe paths, elders assisted with navigation or observation, and the sick were monitored continuously. Roles shifted according to capability, with stronger individuals adjusting speed, carrying loads, and providing physical support as necessary. This interdependence ensured that no member of the tribe was left behind, and that the entire group could function as a single, cohesive unit, capable of responding to both environmental and predatory threats. The psychological dimension of migration was profound. Long, grueling journeys through snow and wind could induce stress, fear, and fatigue. Rituals, songs, and storytelling were employed during movement to maintain morale and reinforce social cohesion. Fire, even in temporary camps, served as a symbol of stability, safety, and continuity. Vulnerable members, positioned centrally and shielded by the group, experienced both protection and inclusion, reinforcing trust and confidence in collective survival strategies. This integration of physical protection, psychological reassurance, and social bonding was a hallmark of human adaptability. Migration in winter also required anticipatory planning for potential emergencies. Sudden storms, predator encounters, or injury could threaten the tribe's survival. Leaders and experienced hunters developed contingency strategies, such as alternate routes, safe havens, and emergency shelters. The weakest members were always central to these plans, their safety determining the timing, route, and pace of movement. By embedding the needs of the vulnerable into every decision, cavemen demonstrated a holistic understanding of survival, where the endurance of the group depended on the care, protection, and strategic inclusion of every individual. Ultimately, winter migration was an extraordinary demonstration of human ingenuity, empathy, and foresight. It required observation, strategic planning, physical endurance, and social coordination. Protecting the weak during these treks was not merely an act of care. It was a practical necessity that preserved life, knowledge, and social cohesion. The children, elders, and sick were not passive participants, but central considerations in every decision, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of collective survival. By following the herds, managing resources, and coordinating movement, Ice Age humans transformed a dangerous, frozen landscape into a navigable environment, ensuring the tribe endured and adapted across generations. Migration also reinforced the cultural and spiritual dimensions of survival. Shared hardships, communal songs, and symbolic gestures provided psychological support, creating a sense of purpose and resilience. The weak, sheltered and cared for, participated in these rituals safely, internalizing the tribe's values and practices. In this way, winter journeys were not only physical endeavors, but also social and cultural exercises, embedding the principles of cooperation, foresight, and empathy into the tribe's collective memory. In the end, winter migrations exemplified the delicate balance between risk, strategy, and compassion. Following the herds was more than a pursuit of food. It was a testament to the tribe's intelligence, social organization, and moral reasoning. By safeguarding the vulnerable, planning meticulously, and moving cohesively, cavemen ensured that the tribe not only survived the harshest winters, but also preserved knowledge, culture, and the continuity of human life. These journeys, arduous yet deliberate, became defining moments of adaptation and resilience, demonstrating that the greatest survival advantage lay not in strength alone, but in the careful integration of care, foresight, and collective intelligence. In the Ice Age, the wilderness was not only frozen, it was fiercely alive. Predators roamed in search of food, and humans themselves were a part of this perilous ecosystem. Wolves, cave lions, bears, and other formidable animals posed constant threats, particularly to the most vulnerable members of the tribe: children, elders, and the sick. Protecting the weak required not just strength and speed, but ingenuity, planning, and constant vigilance. Defense was a full-time occupation, a continuous exercise in observation, strategy, and coordinated action, where every member of the tribe played a role in maintaining safety. Cavemen quickly learned to integrate defensive measures into daily life. Shelter placement, fire management, and physical barriers were essential to creating zones of security. Caves were often chosen for their limited entrances and natural vantage points, while constructed shelters used rocks, snow walls, and firs to fortify living spaces. The weakest members were always positioned in the most protected areas, close to warmth and firelight, reducing their exposure to both environmental dangers and predators. By centralizing the weak within these safe zones, the tribe maximized the protective capabilities of its strongest and most experienced members. Fire remained a primary deterrent against predators. The glow and heat of a well-maintained fire repelled wolves, bears, and other large animals that might otherwise venture close to the camp. Fire also provided early warning. The reflection of eyes, rustling movements, or the crackling of approaching snow could alert watchful members to danger. Hunters and guards maintained vigilance, understanding that even brief lapses could result in catastrophe. The weak, insulated near the fire, benefited from both warmth and the alertness of the watchful, highlighting the interplay between protection, environmental mastery, and social care. Weapons and defensive tools were critical components of survival. Spears, clubs, slings, and later, bows and arrows allowed humans to confront predators at a distance. Hunters and guards developed strategies for patrolling perimeters, creating ambush points, and coordinating responses to threats. Group defense was not merely reactive, it was strategic. By positioning stronger members at the periphery and keeping the weak in secure zones, the tribe ensured that everyone could contribute to survival according to ability, creating a system in which collective intelligence amplified individual capability. Defensive strategies extended beyond physical barriers. Early humans used knowledge of predator behavior to anticipate threats. Wolves, for instance, were often deterred by noise, scent, or displays of human presence. Bears, more solitary and powerful, required careful monitoring and sometimes avoidance altogether. By understanding patterns of predation and territorial behavior, cavemen could position themselves and their weakest members advantageously, reducing risk while maximizing survival opportunities. This awareness reflects not only intelligence, but an early form of ecological literacy, where humans read the environment as a map of danger and opportunity. Guard rotations and night watches were integral to predator defense. Members with the sharpest senses or most experience remained alert, scanning for movement or sounds that indicated potential threats. Even when exhaustion threatened, the system of rotating vigilance ensured that the weakest were never left unprotected. Children, elders, and the sick remained insulated in central zones, often sleeping near the fire, while the tribe's strength and strategy absorbed the brunt of external risk. This careful orchestration of attention and energy demonstrates the sophistication of Ice Age social systems and their integration of empathy with survival strategy. Hunting expeditions also intersected with predator defense. A successful hunt provided food, but also drew attention. Carcasses could attract wolves or other scavengers. Planning hunts included considerations for returning safely, transporting prey without endangering the weak, and maintaining a protective perimeter during consumption and processing. The most vulnerable members remained centrally located, insulated from both the cold and predatory threats, while hunters employed strategy and strength to secure food. This careful coordination underscores the interdependence of offensive and defensive strategies in Ice Age survival. Defense strategies were sometimes communal and ritualized. The presence of fire, vocal signals, and symbolic gestures created zones of deterrence and awareness. Young members learned these techniques through observation, internalizing both practical skills and social norms. By embedding defensive knowledge into daily routines and social rituals, early humans ensured that survival skills were transmitted safely, even to those who could not participate directly in high-risk activities. Protecting the weak, therefore, was simultaneously an act of care and a method of preserving communal knowledge. Predator encounters could also influence migration and settlement patterns. Groups often chose campsites based on visibility, terrain advantages, and proximity to natural resources while minimizing exposure to large predators. Even subtle features, a hill slope, a dense thicket, or a frozen stream, could provide tactical advantages. The weakest members influenced these decisions profoundly. Their needs dictated which sites were considered safe, how shelters were constructed, and how perimeters were organized. By prioritizing the most vulnerable, The tribe demonstrated an early form of ethical reasoning embedded in practical survival strategy. The psychological aspect of predator defense was as important as the physical. Awareness of potential danger heightened vigilance, but also induced stress and fear. Rituals, firelight, storytelling, and social cohesion mitigated these effects, providing reassurance to the weak and bolstering group morale. Children and elders, safely sheltered, experienced both protection and a sense of belonging, reinforcing trust in the collective capacity for defense. In this way, predator avoidance was not only a tactical concern, but a social and emotional strategy, integrating physical safety with mental resilience. The integration of defense, strategy, and empathy exemplifies the unique adaptability of Ice Age humans. Protecting the weak required intelligence, foresight, and coordination. Every aspect of daily life, from shelter placement and fire maintenance to hunting strategy and migration, was influenced by the need to safeguard the most vulnerable. This careful orchestration ensured not only immediate survival, but also the long-term continuity of the tribe, allowing knowledge, culture, and social cohesion to endure despite a world filled with danger. Ultimately, predator defense in the Ice Age was a multidimensional practice. It required observation, planning, communication, and cooperative effort. By prioritizing the weakest members and leveraging collective strength, early humans turned vulnerability into a central factor in strategic decision-making. Wolves, bears, and other predators were not merely threats. They were catalysts for ingenuity, social cooperation, and the development of complex survival strategies. Protecting the weak was therefore both a moral and practical imperative, ensuring that the tribe could endure the harshest conditions, adapt to environmental challenges, and transmit essential knowledge and skills across generations. In the unforgiving landscape of the Ice Age, survival depended as much on care and empathy as on physical prowess. Every defensive measure, every night watch, and every fire tended was an investment in the tribe's collective future. By understanding the behavior of predators, organizing protective perimeters, and ensuring that children, elders, and the sick were never exposed to unnecessary danger, cavemen created a resilient system that integrated physical defense with social responsibility. In this way, the Ice Age was not only a test of strength, it was a testament to human intelligence, cooperation, and the enduring power of collective care. The frozen landscapes of the Ice Age were unforgiving, shaping not only the bodies but also the minds, societies, and cultures of early humans. Cavemen faced relentless cold, scarce food, and powerful predators, yet they endured, adapted, and thrived through ingenuity, cooperation, and foresight. Studying their winter survival offers profound lessons for modern humanity, not only in understanding resilience, resourcefulness, and social intelligence, but also in appreciating the delicate balance between vulnerability and strength. The legacy of these early humans is not merely historical. It continues to illuminate the core principles of human adaptability, empathy, and innovation. One of the most striking lessons is the importance of prioritizing the vulnerable. Ice Age humans understood that the survival of children, elders, and the sick was not only a moral imperative but also a practical necessity. Protecting the weak strengthened the tribe as a whole. It ensured the continuation of knowledge, the preservation of skill, and the stability of social structures. In modern terms, this principle resonates in systems of communal care, education, and social responsibility. By observing how early humans integrated protection of the vulnerable into daily life, through sleeping arrangements, food distribution, and hunting strategies, we gain insight into the origins of empathy as a survival mechanism. The strategic use of environmental resources also stands as a testament to human ingenuity. Cavemen leveraged fire, animal hides, natural shelters, and seasonal migrations to survive the harshest winters. Every action, from building insulated shelters and tending fire cycles to constructing traps and planning migrations, was informed by a deep understanding of the environment. They transformed adversity into opportunity, using observation, experimentation, and adaptation to thrive where survival seemed impossible. Today, this teaches us the value of working with rather than against the natural world, of reading signs, anticipating challenges, and optimizing resources in a thoughtful, sustainable way. Social cohesion and cooperation emerge as central pillars of Ice Age survival. Winter gatherings, group hunts, and collective defense strategies illustrate that strength lies not in individual prowess, but in organized, purposeful collaboration. Every member contributed according to ability, with stronger individuals protecting and guiding the weaker, ensuring the collective's endurance. This balance of social roles fostered trust, accountability, and a shared sense of purpose. Modern societies continue to rely on these same principles. Teamwork, division of labor, and the prioritization of collective well-being remain essential for resilience in both ordinary and extraordinary circumstances. Rituals and beliefs provided both psychological and cultural stability. In the face of long, dark nights and unpredictable dangers, cavemen developed ceremonies, stories, and symbolic practices that helped reduce anxiety, create shared meaning, and reinforce communal norms. The weak, safely situated within these ritual spaces, absorb cultural knowledge and learn to navigate life's uncertainties. This illustrates that human survival is not purely physical, it is deeply psychological and cultural. Modern parallels can be drawn in practices that build community cohesion, preserve knowledge, and nurture resilience during periods of stress or uncertainty. Winter survival also depended on flexibility and adaptability. Hunters tracked herds, responded to predator behavior, and adjusted migration patterns according to shifting environmental conditions. These adaptive strategies required observation, foresight, and rapid problem-solving, skills that are as relevant today as they were in the Ice Age. The lesson is clear. Resilience comes not from rigid planning, but from the ability to anticipate, respond, and adjust to changing circumstances. By studying these ancient strategies, we gain insight into how humans can prepare for uncertainty, manage risk, and innovate under pressure. Another critical lesson lies in the integration of multiple survival strategies. Cavemen did not rely on a single skill or resource. They combined fire management, tool-making, hunting, shelter construction, social organization, and rituals into a holistic survival system. This multidimensional approach ensured redundancy and resilience. If one strategy failed, others compensated. Modern challenges, whether environmental, social, or technological, can benefit from this same principle of layered, complementary solutions. Success is rarely the result of a single tactic, but emerges from coordinated, adaptable systems that address multiple vulnerabilities simultaneously. The careful management of energy and resources highlights a subtle but profound intelligence. Cavemen rationed food, prioritized the weak, and conserved energy during extreme cold, ensuring the tribe could endure long winters. Every decision, from when to hunt to where to rest, was informed by an acute awareness of physical limits and environmental constraints. In contemporary life, this translates into lessons about sustainability, planning, and the efficient use of resources, reminding us that foresight and prudence are timeless strategies for resilience. Winter journeys and migrations underscore the importance of planning and collective responsibility. Cavemen made decisions based not only on immediate needs, but on long-term survival prospects, coordinating routes, pacing, and shelter arrangements to protect the weak. These experiences reveal how mobility, foresight, and collaboration can mitigate risk in the face of uncertainty. Modern parallels exist in logistics, disaster planning, and community organization, where the same principles, prioritization, coordination, and protection of vulnerable populations remain essential for success and survival. Predator defense illustrates the interplay between risk, vigilance, and proactive strategy. By observing animal behavior, maintaining protective perimeters, and positioning the weakest at the center of safety, Ice Age humans created sophisticated systems of defense. This principle applies broadly. In any high-risk environment, anticipating threats, allocating responsibility, and safeguarding the vulnerable are central to both survival and organizational success. These strategies highlight how empathy, intelligence, and collective action intersect in high-stakes scenarios. The psychological dimension of winter survival cannot be understated. Fear, stress, and uncertainty were constant companions. Yet rituals, social cohesion, and strategic care for the weak provided reassurance and mental resilience. Children learned trust, elders retained authority, and the group maintained morale. These lessons remind us that survival is as much about psychological endurance as physical capability. Modern applications include the importance of social support, shared purpose, and structured routines in maintaining resilience during challenging times. Ultimately, the legacy of Ice Age winter survival is one of integration, melding physical, social, cultural, and psychological strategies into a cohesive system. Protecting the weak, managing resources, fostering social cohesion, adapting to environmental changes, and embedding knowledge into ritual and daily practice allowed humans not only to endure, but to thrive. These lessons remain relevant today, emphasizing that survival is multifaceted and that long-term resilience depends on empathy, cooperation, and intelligence as much as strength or skill. Reflecting on this legacy, we recognize that the principles guiding cavemen survival resonate across millennia. They remind us that the survival of any group, whether a tribe in the Ice Age or a modern society facing global challenges, relies on prioritizing the vulnerable, sharing knowledge, coordinating efforts, and adapting to changing circumstances. Winter survival was not simply about enduring the cold. It was about creating systems that reinforced life, learning, and continuity. This enduring wisdom continues to shape our understanding of human resilience and the value of collective care. In the end, studying how cavemen survived the harshest winters offers more than historical insight. It provides a blueprint for human adaptability and ethical responsibility. From protecting the weak to harnessing environmental knowledge, from integrating social, physical, and psychological strategies to fostering cooperation and ritual, Ice Age humans demonstrated that survival is an active, deliberate process. Their legacy teaches us that resilience is built through foresight, empathy, and collaboration, lessons that remain as vital today as they were tens of thousands of years ago. The Ice Age may be gone, but the strategies, values, and ingenuity of those who endured its winters live on, shaping the very essence of human survival.